of courage, all of these things, right? Willpower, mindset, all of these things are things that will block you in a very honest way, right? Lack of money, self-imposter syndrome. So there are all these things that come up, right? And if I asked people, you know, it would be some version of this, okay? Which is the first part is sort of, you know, a lack of knowledge, no domain expertise, no founder market fit, a quest for perfect information, right? I have a phrase which says that any idiot can make a decision with perfect information. But of course, the problem is we always want more information before we make a judgment. High opportunity cost, lack of confidence. You guys, many of these are in the chat. How could my idea possibly be good enough, right? How can the idea that I have, that I've spent, you know, that I have no history or experience on, could it possibly be good enough? Okay, and how can it be possibly true that larger companies with more people and resources did not think of this idea? Okay, and so ultimately what I would say is what all of these things come down to is a fear and an inability to trust your judgment to commit. Okay, committing to your judgment is a hard thing, right? Meaning all of you feel it. You all sort of have these ideas. You think there may be something there, but ultimately you talk yourself out of it. Sometimes for good reasons and sometimes not. But it's really because there's a fear, and the fear may come from a lack of confidence, a lack of information, whatever it may be, but there is a fear, okay? So what I want to talk to you about is a mindset that may help you overcome this fear and to over time trust your judgment to actually commit to a path that enables you to build something of consequence, okay? Okay, so this is the way I think about how I think about the founder mindset. And certainly it's the way I think about my life and how I've been teaching now for 20 years, how I've taught my students, which is at a very high level, the hardest judgment any of us need to make on a founder path is the decision to commit, okay? Because of course, what that means is you're committing to a risky path, you're foregoing other options, which, you know, in this age, we all want to preserve options, and we're committing. And the reason one needs to commit is because it's impossible to build anything of consequence without committing, right? It's like going into war with two hands tied behind your back. And so not only do you learn what you're capable of when you commit, but this thing called magic happens when you commit, right? Which is that things happen precisely because you have committed, okay? And this doesn't happen all the time. It happens over time. And so the question is, what is that magic, right? What is that magic? Well, it's the things we talked about. It's learning, and I'll give you a definition of learning in a minute. Resources, conviction, confidence, credibility. It's all the things that we are so nervous about. These things all start to increase precisely because we commit. And ultimately, with these things, we can have an impact that we want, right? And so at its core, what the founder mindset is all about is this desire to trust your judgment, to commit to something such that you benefit the magic of learning, resources, conviction, confidence, and credibility, and you can have the impact that we all desperately want, right? The impact on the ones that we care about, whether that's ourselves, our family, our community, our country, or the world, okay? So what I'd like to do is take a step back and talk to you a little bit about sort of my life and how this founder mindset has helped me. And what I'd say is I don't pretend to be living a life that is similar to yours today, but I can say that in some ways it might have started that way, okay? So I was born in Mombasa, Kenya in 1969. You know, we emigrated. There was a point in time when Idi Amin was throwing out the Indians from Uganda. And so we were very lucky to kind of win the lottery, and 25,000 Indians were let into Canada sight unseen. You know, neither of my parents had gone to college. My dad didn't work for the first 3 or 4 years. My mom was a secretary We moved 7 or 8 times when we came to Toronto. By the way, if I could see anyone, I'd call on a Kenyan and say Jambo Bariako, and I'm hoping that we have a Kenyan in the crowd. So the point being that, you know, my childhood was an interesting childhood in that the first time that I left Kenya was to go on a plane to go to Canada. And 3 things happened to me early. And I'm a big believer that things that happen in your childhood, both the good things and the bad things, have a lot to do with what happens to you in the future. And the 3 things, sort of large things that happened to me was, 1, obviously immigrating to a new country was jarring. 2 was remarkably the Mombasa education system was greater than the Toronto education system, and I skipped a grade. And the 3rd thing is my parents made an interesting decision, which is unlike most immigrants to a country where you hang out with your immigrant community. So if you're Greek coming to New York, you're going to hang out with the Greeks in New York. If you're an Italian coming to San Francisco, you're going to hang out with the Italians. They cut us off from our community. Really, it was sort of a sink or swim mentality. And so what was interesting was you know, there were a lot of obstacles as a child. And what I've learned, because I know many of you have gone through many obstacles and are going through obstacles. And I don't pretend that my obstacles are greater than yours. I would just say that they felt like obstacles to me. Is what I've learned is, as a kid, when you go through obstacles, there's 2 ways to respond to that, right? It can cause lots of pain, and you can feel like the world is really against you because you had to go through all these obstacles. Or perhaps you can look at it in a very different way, which is you had the privilege of overcoming obstacles not of your own choosing. Okay, you had the privilege of overcoming obstacles not of your own choosing early in your life, okay, such that you learned a tremendous amount about yourself. Okay, you learned how resilient you were, you learned what you could overcome, such that as you grow up, things that seem material to others seem immaterial to you because of the trajectory that you've had. Okay, so I would encourage those of you who've gone through obstacles in their childhood to think hard about how they might have benefited you. This is my family, and this is where we grew up in Toronto on the 2nd floor. So this is nothing particularly glamorous about this. But the point is I would encourage you to think about your childhood, and I don't look at that apartment building and think about how miserable it was, although it was pretty miserable. What I think about is, wow, we started from Mombasa, Kenya. We got to this place where we'd never seen snow beforehand and lived in this building and learned a tremendous amount at a young age about what I might be capable of, okay? So early on in my life, I started thinking about this mindset. And I didn't have it necessarily frameworked like this, but I didn't have very much in the way of resources. And I didn't have very much in the way of conviction or confidence. So I was very focused on how can I learn as much as possible, because that is something that I thought I could compete on. And so, of course, the question then is, you know, I said, okay, well, this is the founder mindset. I didn't have it laid out like this when I was younger, but certainly this is, I always thought one day maybe I could have impact. I wanted to be able to trust my judgment to commit to something so that I could found something. And at that time, it was absolutely to have money and power and all these things, but ultimately to have freedom. And so I focused on learning. And so the question I ask is, how will you learn the most, right? Meaning learning is such a odd word, meaning of course you want to learn. So what is learning? Is it like reading a book? Is it listening to people like me? What is learning? And so my definition of learning is the following. Okay, and I know it's like, I believe this to be true. It's how I've led my life. My definition of learning is making consequential decisions you're accountable for. Okay, and the reason it's that is because it is in those moments that you are trusting the thing that we all most want to develop, and that is judgment. Okay, the thing every founder wants is judgment. Judgment lives in decision-making. Okay, there's no judgment from observing. There's no judgment from reading. Doesn't mean those things aren't things that are important, but judgment occurs when you actually make consequential decisions that you are accountable for. Okay. And so the question was, okay, well, if I believe that to be true, how can I live that way? And so for me, when I think about maximizing learning, by definition, if I say learning is about consequential decision-making, and decisions by definition involve uncertainty, right? Every decision, the reason it's a decision is because it involves uncertainty. You must realize that in order to optimize learning, you need to commit to this thing called uncertainty, which is a very hard thing to do because, of course, we as human beings are trained to think that we want nothing but comfort and certainty, because uncertainty leads to bad things. And I would argue the exact opposite. I think that comfort and certainty leads to very little growth and very little learning, whereas uncertainty leads to tremendous learning and tremendous growth. Now, there's obviously risk in uncertainty, and so calibrating risk is incredibly important, and we will talk about that. Okay? And the reality is that if you think about uncertainty, where that is where judgment lies. So if I had to say what is the most important trait that a founder that a founder wants, it's good judgment. Because all a founder does every day is make decisions. And you're making those decisions based on your judgment. And judgment is like any other muscle. Okay, judgment is like a bicep. Okay, if you never use your judgment, you will have no judgment. Okay, if you practice judgment, your judgment will grow and you will learn to trust it more and you will commit to it. Okay, and the remarkable things is if you look at the world out there and you look at sort of the most interesting founders, they've, of course, trusted their judgment and committed to a life of uncertainty. Okay, okay. So what I want to talk about is this commitment thing, because, of course, when I say commitment, what I imagine a lot of you guys are thinking is, oh my God, this is like what the feeling is me jumping off a cliff in the middle of a torrential rainstorm, you know, through a hurricane into the ocean with sharks and no life jacket. Okay, that's what it feels like. Okay, that's what it feels like. And the reality is that's not what it is. Okay, that's what people think it is as a founder, but that is not what it is. What it is a series of small C commitments. Okay, the founder mindset, yes, it's about committing and using your judgment to commit to something. But of course, that commitment is a series of small C commitments. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through, and obviously this is my life, and I don't pretend to assume that this is the same for all of you. But I think the learnings are the same. Okay, I think that the learnings are the same, albeit the context may be very different. Okay, so let me tell you 3 stories about small C commitments that involve judgment and that lead to magic. Okay, okay. So I was born in Mombasa. I then moved to Toronto, Canada, with my parents. I then spent 15 years in the U.S. and one day I came back to visit, and let me be clear, because this will be relevant. If I think back, the single most important event in my family's life was the opportunity to emigrate to Canada when we were young, because it changed the trajectory for my brother and me. Okay, and that will be relevant in a minute. Okay, so when I came back to visit my parents, there's a highway that goes from the Toronto airport to downtown Toronto. Okay, this highway is literally in the middle of nowhere. All right, it's up by the airport. And what I noticed from my car is that there were all these self-storage facilities, one after the other, right next to each other. And it didn't make any sense to me why a dozen self-storage facilities will be right next to each other in the middle of nowhere. Now, especially because I lived in New York and San Francisco, And I'd seen that there were self-storage facilities in downtown New York, downtown San Francisco that looked very different than this, right? They were in high household urban income areas, multi-story, and this looked like this. And so the decision, so you can imagine that this idea of why are there a dozen storage facilities along this highway? I can promise you there were millions of other people with that same idea. Everyone looking out the window would have the same idea, okay? And they would think to themselves, why are there these storage facilities right next to each other? Okay, but what they think is, well, I'm not going to do anything about it because surely I can't possibly have a good idea because someone else would have explored this and there must be a common sense reason why this exists. So I'm just going to go on with my day and I'm not going to stop the car and explore. Okay. So that is a typical mindset, which is I'm not going to trust my judgment around this idea that maybe there's something interesting here. I'm just going to believe that someone else with more resources will have thought about it and there's nothing interesting here. Now, the interesting thing is if Jeff Bezos had thought that way, if Elon Musk had thought that way, if Mark Zuckerberg had thought that way, none of those companies would exist today because there were others with far more resources that were selling books and cars than Bezos and Musk. Okay, so the decision I made was to stop the car, okay? And because I stopped the car, and I literally spent 20 minutes in 2 storage facilities and found out that they, were terribly serviced yet completely full. It doesn't, in those 20 minutes, what I learned was there was a massive opportunity to build a different kind of self-storage in Canada. Now, obviously, I then did a bunch of other things subsequently, but had I not stopped that car and made that 15-minute trade, a small C commitment, I wouldn't have built StorageNow, I wouldn't have built Edgewood, and I wouldn't have built Alignvest Student Housing. Three very large businesses that in total are worth about $1.5 billion, okay? But when I think about it, it is because I stopped the car. So this is a small C commitment where I trusted my judgment. The cost was I was wrong. The benefit was I could change my family's trajectory, okay? Okay, yeah, these are the 3 businesses that were built. All right, I want to talk about something else. Okay, and again, yes, I take the point that this happened at Harvard Business School, but I think this could happen elsewhere. Okay, so this picture on the left is me at the age of 26 in my Harvard Business School class in the 4th row there. Beside me was a Turkish fellow named Levent Karaman. Levent used to tell the story that him getting from the village he grew up in Turkey to Istanbul was a far harder journey than him getting from Istanbul to Harvard Business School. He was a brilliant guy, is a brilliant guy. And I always thought one day we might build a business together. But Levent decided to go into fixed income. He went on Wall Street. And so our paths didn't really cross because he was very much focused on, mortgage bonds, sales and trading. And I was focused on building businesses. Okay. But I always thought about Levent. And then in 2009, in the middle of the financial crisis, I'm reading, as many are, about this mortgage crisis. And I thought, wow, I know nothing about fixed income or mortgages, but maybe I should call my friend Levent, who is the world expert on mortgages. And I should invite him to come and stay with me for a few days, and let's try and figure out if there is something we can build. And so I picked up the phone and asked him to come visit me. And we spent a few days brainstorming what we might do. And of course, it started with, well, how could we compete with Goldman Sachs? How could we compete with Morgan Stanley? But because I picked up the phone, and because we spent that time, the small C commitment, we ended up building a company called KGS. Levent was the K, I was the S. And we built that over 7 years and sold it for close to $500 million to Bank of Montreal. Okay, again, a small C commitment. Now, yes, of course, there was a lot of hard work, but it started with picking up the phone. Okay, picking up the phone. And let me tell you again, there were millions of people who had the idea as they were reading the paper of maybe there's an opportunity to build something in the midst of this crisis around mortgages. Okay, I want to talk about one last story. So I mentioned to you that to me, getting to Canada was an important event, and it went from my parents hadn't even gone to college to this place providing us a opportunity to do well. Both my brother and I end up at Harvard, and we both end up building businesses. So I always thought to myself that one day I'd love to give back and have my impact on Canada. Okay. And again, I was walking along the street in Toronto, across the street from University of Toronto, which is the largest university in Canada. And I was thinking about this problem. Okay. And this problem being, why is there an increasing prosperity gap between Canada and the US? Okay, why is it that Canadians generate or less prosperous than the US? And what I realized was, I was thinking to myself, I don't feel like it's because they work less. I don't feel like it's because they're less educated. And certainly this was a problem that everyone in Canada was focused on. And I thought to myself, well, maybe it has something to do with expectations and exposure. And the reason was that, frankly, the median worker in Canada provided as much value as the median worker in the US. But the US had all these right tail founders, right? Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Michelle Zatlyn, all these people who were doing extraordinary things. And so I was thinking to myself, well, why is it that Canada doesn't have any of these right tail founders? And so I was walking along St. George Street. For those of you who've been to Toronto, that's on the left is a picture of the University of Toronto Business School, on the right is Department of Economics. And I thought to myself, well, maybe there's something I can do about this. And so I went into the business school, and I knocked on the door of the dean, and he wasn't there. So I kind of came out, and I was like, all right, well, I guess there's nothing I'm going to do. I'll just go on with my day and meet my friend and go for a drink. And I looked across the street, it was the Department of Economics. And so I said, okay, let me try that. So I go in there and I say to the assistant, I look up at the board, and the dean's name is Michael Berkowitz. And I say, I'd like to see Dean Berkowitz. And the assistant says, well, do you have an appointment? I say, no, I don't have an appointment, but I'd like to see him. She says, well, you can't see him. And so the dean kind of poked his head out because he heard this ruckus. And I said, Dean Berkowitz, I'd like to meet with you. And I guess he found me interesting enough to meet with and pushy enough. So I sat down with him and I said, look, I want to teach a class at University of Toronto. He said, no, people like you who are entrepreneurs, you should just come in and guest lecture, tell us some founder stories. I said, no, I don't want to tell any founder stories. I want to commit and create a class, and I will teach it twice a week. And he said, well, do you have your PhD? I said, no, I don't have my PhD. He said, have you ever taught before? I said, no, I haven't taught before. He said, well, why would I let you do this? I said, because I believe that this will be the best class that University of Toronto has. And I believe that this will be the start of expanding expectations for people, providing them with exposure, and trying to decrease this gap between Canadian right tail entrepreneurs and American right tail entrepreneurs. Okay, so he saw the fire and ambition in my eyes and took a shot on me, right? It was sort of magic, which was like, okay, I'm going to trust this guy, and I'm actually going to put him in the faculty and have him teach. Okay, this was 20 years ago, and I've now been teaching for 20 years. And one of the things I created, sort of my impact, or part of the impact I wanted to have, was something called Next Canada, which today has had over 1,500 young entrepreneurs go through it, and collectively, they've launched 400 ventures. They've raised over $4 billion of capital. We've created over 10,000 jobs, and we are reducing the gap between Canada and the US in terms of prosperity. Okay, so let's be clear, none of this would have happened had I not knocked on the door and asked Dean Berkowitz to take a shot on me. So a small C commitment leads to the impact that me as a kid, I desperately wanted. Okay, what's interesting about this is no different than the largest companies in the world, right? This is no different, okay? I can promise you there were thousands of people at Barnes & Noble. Now, you guys I don't know if you know Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble was the world's largest bookstore chain, okay, in the 1990s. Thousands of people at Barnes & Noble whose only job was to think about how to sell more books. Now, along comes a guy named Jeff Bezos, who maybe has read one or two books. And he ends up building what ends up being the world's biggest bookstore. Okay, everyone missed it. All those brilliant people at Barnes & Noble whose living was based on selling more books miss it. Okay, Tesla. So there are probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people in the US car industry at GM, Ford, Chrysler, et cetera, whose only job is to think about how to sell more cars. They have billions of dollars of research budgets, hundreds of billions of dollars of sales, hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. And yet somehow a fellow named Elon Musk ends up building a car company that today has a market cap that is in excess of the next 10 largest American car companies combined. Okay? And the list goes on with Meta. The point is whether it's big or small, what each of these founders have to do is to actually start the journey with a small C commitment where they trust their judgment to actually explore the idea. And they suspend disbelief that others with much more information, much more resources may just have missed it. And guess what? Those people miss it all the time. So some of you may be familiar with Joseph Campbell, whose work is called The Hero's Journey. I like to call this the founder's journey. I think the parallels between a founder and a hero are dramatic. And so for those of you who are more literary, you'll be familiar with this hero's journey, but it's actually, in my mind, a very interesting approach to think about a founder's journey and the founder mindset. So think about the top half of the circle as being the ordinary world, and the bottom half of the circle as being the extraordinary world. Okay, so we're all born in the ordinary world in point one. All of us will have a call to adventure. All of us. Okay, that may be we see an idea, that may be someone gives us an opportunity. There is some call to adventure. Most of us will refuse the call and never get past 3. Okay, most of us will just say, I'm not capable enough. I don't have enough information. I'm not confident enough. I'm too scared. All these things. And some of it may be for good reasons. I have to support my family, whatever it may be. Okay, the vast majority of people stop at 3 with a refusal of the call. The amazing thing is if you get through 3, invariably you will meet someone, a mentor, someone who will help you get from the ordinary world to the extraordinary world, and you will cross the threshold. Okay, and there will be all sorts of crises, all sorts of tests, all sorts of enemies, meaning you can't find your first customer, you can't raise money, a competitor comes in with more resources. It is fraught with mythological crises. And then you will regroup. And at your most desperate moment, you will come up with a new approach to overcome the ordeal. And the reward will be a return back to the ordinary world with far more learning and the opportunity to return with the elixir or to have a real impact on the ordinary world. Okay. And so in many ways, this hero's journey aligns for me with a founder's journey. Okay. So the question is how do we do this, right? How do we actually do this? And I've positioned to you that at its core, it's about having the judgment to commit to something that you believe in. And of course, judgment requires some sort of calibration of risk, okay? And so I would encourage you, I think there's a fundamental human miscalibration that happens, which is that people dramatically overstate their downside and understate their upside. And if you overstate your downside and understate your upside, automatically that will lead to a different outcome. And so the question is, how do I actually calibrate risk? Okay. And so I would think hard about it as when we make decisions that prioritize stability or minimize uncertainty, we think we're doing that because we're removing left tail events, right? We think that by prioritizing stability, we are removing awful left tail events, okay? But in reality, most of those left tail outcomes are still there, right? We can still have a family illness. We can still get fired. Those terrible outcomes, unfortunately, are still there, okay? But what's happened, okay, is that we are still taking those left tail risks with very little right tail upside, such that we are getting, it's much more likely that we're going to get an average outcome. So then when we focus in sort of the non-monetary compensation from entrepreneurship, okay, and I'll get to how learning ties into financial in a minute. Okay, entrepreneurship suddenly looks far more attractive, right? Because I think we would all agree, and we said this at the beginning, that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, certainly if you believe my definition of learning as being making consequential decisions that you're accountable for, the learning is at the far right tail. So think of entrepreneurship as a transformational journey, okay? One where you're making consequential decisions. By making consequential decisions, you hone your judgment and you allow for exponential learning. Now, what do I mean by exponential learning? Well, what I mean by exponential learning is whether I look at my life or I look at other founders, there's no reason why at the age of 29, I could start a technology company, or at the age of 32, I could start a real estate company, or at the age of 36, I could start a fixed income broker dealer company, or at the age of 33, I could start teaching. I mean, what I'd say to you is what I tried to do was trust my judgment to do things on a small C way such that I would get more information to actually learn more. And what's interesting about founders is decision-making and judgment is not linear, it's exponential. Okay, so as you increase your judgment, as you make more and more decisions, your judgment increases exponentially. And so that's why you see so many young founders that can actually build material businesses. And of course, far too often, we don't allow ourselves to learn what we're capable of because we are so scared of failure, okay? And we'll talk about failure in a minute, and I'd ask you this question around failure, which is, you know, if you think about your life and you think about only two states of the world, you're either going to try and fail, or you're never going to try again, or you're never going to try, right? There's no option of trying and succeeding. I think most people at the end of their lives would actually would choose to try and fail over not trying at all, because at least they will have known that they swung the bat and did their best, okay? Okay, the other thing that's interesting is Harvard has just published some research, which, you know, I've always thought that even as a failed founder, because of the learning, the market would value that failure more than a non-failed founder who had taken a traditional path in terms of where they end up. And you can look at this research report, which my colleague at Harvard has published, which basically says that if you they compared 5 million resumes, 5 million people. And what they looked at was a group that were non-founders that had taken a traditional path. And they compared them with people who had similar backgrounds, similar educational and professional backgrounds, but that were founders that had failed. And what they found was that those failed founders came back into the jobs with 3 years of seniority to the non-failed founders. So effectively, the market valued the failed founders with a 3-year increase in seniority over the non-founders. Now, we're not even talking about successful founders. We're just talking about failed founders. So it's an interesting thing. And so why is that? Why is it? Okay, why is it that the market would value it this way? And it's precisely because of the learning. Because what the market sees is that even in failure, okay, even in failure, you are making decisions as founders, and therefore you're starting to trust your judgment, and therefore your judgment, even though in failure, is better. And judgment is the thing that every leader most wants, okay? But what gets there is commitment, right? There is no judgment without you actually committing, okay? Because if you don't commit, the judgments you're making are not actually particularly consequential. Okay. So I would encourage you to think about commitment not as a sacrifice. I've heard so many people talk about commitment and as a sacrifice, as something that you don't want to do, but you're going to do. I would encourage you to think about it as a superpower, especially in this day and age where there's just so much distraction, right? And so there is this sort of two things happening. There's an unprecedented boon and opportunities for entrepreneurs, but there's this commitment crisis. And there's no way anyone can found anything without committing to it, okay? And so I would encourage you to think about what commitment looks like to you. And, I have a phrase which says that especially, and again, this is certainly true in North America, what I call the curse of optionality, right? There are so many people who spend their life collecting options, okay? Not wanting to commit to anything because they think the next thing will be better. And I would tell you that a life where you had 100 options but never committed to one is a very sad life. Okay, it is because you never actually find out what you're capable of. Now, the other thing about commitment, and I'm writing a book about commitment, so I expect all of you to read it. The other thing about commitment is it's not only a superpower for founding a business, it's a superpower for living a happy life. Okay, so there is a study, a very important study that Harvard did. It's the longest longitudinal study of human happiness. And what they did is they followed 800, unfortunately it's just men, but 800 men over the past 75 years. 400 men were graduates of the Harvard class of 50 something, and 400 men were from the inner city, lower socioeconomic backgrounds in inner city Boston. And every year they would check in on them and they'd say, what is making you happy? And of course, all these outcomes, some who were very rich became very poor, some who were poor became very rich. And as they went along their life, different things were important. Sometimes it was, I want to make money. I want to have power. I want prestige, all this sort of thing. Now, of course, these men are all at the end of their lives in their 80s. And they said, and again, what they've said is, what is the single most important thing that has led to your happiness, or that would lead to human happiness to these 800 people? And overwhelmingly, it was the ability to nurture long-term enduring relationships. Okay. Now, for those of you, some of you aren't old enough to know this, but nurturing a long-term enduring relationship, whether that's with a partner, a spouse, a parent, a close friend, that involves two things. It involves time and it involves commitment, because everyone knows that any long-term relationship goes through crisis, health, other, whatever, all sorts of crisis. And so what's remarkable about commitment, it's the superpower for contentment too, because as it turns out, the trait that these men in their 80s most wanted for contentment was commitment to long-term relationships. Okay, so we'll end shortly because we'll have a few minutes for some questions in a minute. So let's go back to this founder mindset. Okay, so again, I would encourage you. This is something I've created. I would encourage you to think about this being a holistic chart. Okay, where you really start practicing your judgment, even small judgments, such that you can start to commit. Okay, so that you can actually experience the magic both in your professional and your personal lives. The magic being the learning, the resources that you get to have the impact that you want, the impact that we all desperately want, which is to make a positive impact on others, right? It is the reason I've taught. It's the reason I teach. It's the reason why I'm involved with Aspire. It's the reason why I built Next Canada. Yes, I needed the learning and the resources that I got from founding businesses. But what I really want is the impact that I'm having in situations like this and elsewhere. Okay. I want to leave you with some tenets. Again, this is how I live my life. I view the founder mindset as not a way of building a business. I view it as a way of living your life. Okay. So first of all, entrepreneurship is the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. Okay. It is opportunity driven, not resource constrained. Okay. Most large companies are constrained by the resources they have. Okay. That is your opportunity. Okay. You have no resources, so you should not be constrained in any way by them because you don't have any. What you should be thinking about is opportunity. Okay. And what I would also say is I think entrepreneurship is a force for positive impact, right? Creating jobs, building businesses that customers want, increasing prosperity is a good thing. I also believe, having taught founder development and entrepreneurship for 20 years, I know a lot of people think it's genetic. I don't believe that's true. Okay. I believe entrepreneurship and this founder mindset can be learned, okay, in the ways that I've talked about. And I would say to you that as you think about your founder mindset, the metric is learning. Okay. Money will come if you learn the most. Okay. So think about how you learn the most. And what that means is putting yourself in situations where you're making consequential decisions that you are accountable for. Okay. And the goal is to increase judgment and reap the benefits of exponential learning. Okay. I want you to think about judgment as being the gap between confidence and capabilities. Okay. So I meet so many students who say, you know what, I'm not going to contribute because I don't feel like I'm capable. Now imagine the logic there, right? Imagine a world where you would only contribute if you only felt capable. There's no learning in that world. Okay, there's no learning in that world. Okay, judgment lies in the gap between confidence and capabilities. Now that gap can't be too big because then it's arrogance. Okay, but you need to enter that uncertain gap, which is where you need to trust your judgment. Okay, which is between confidence and capabilities. And as you start trusting your judgment and seeing that you can count on it, everything expands and moves up, okay, such that the decision-making gets better and better, okay? I talked about trusting your instincts. Like my phrases are stop the car. That's how I built my real estate businesses. Knock on the door. That's how I built my fixed income broker-dealer business. Sorry, knock the door is how I built my, how I became a professor and built Next Canada and started teaching at Harvard Business School. Pick up the phone is how I built my fixed income broker-dealer business. The point is, what all of these things require is the following set of beliefs. One is ideas are everywhere. Two is ideas are accessible to people without resources. Okay. Three is that people with more resources miss things all the time. All the time. Just look at the 10 largest businesses and you will see these three beliefs in action. Okay. Risk. I know people here are very focused on risk, and I totally get it, right? People are financially constrained. They're thinking hard about how to support their families, and I think that's a very noble and very real thing. Having said that, I also know that part of the reason you're all part of this program is because you're capable of extraordinary things, okay? And so it doesn't mean be blind to the downside. What it means is don't eliminate the upside, okay? You're all put here because you could accomplish and achieve and impact in a great way. And so I would encourage you, as you think about making decisions, to preserve what that upside node looks like, okay? I would also say to you, when you think about decision making, if most people, when they're faced with uncertainty, they do nothing, right? They just freeze, or they just say, I need more information, I'm going to do nothing. Now, what I need you to do is think about two things. If you decide not to do anything, train your mind to actively make that a decision. Okay, meaning say to yourself that if I am in doubt, I will act, even if that action is to preserve the status quo. Because what it does is it forces you to start to make judgments and not to kind of hide, be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand and be like, I'm just going to do nothing. Make that an active decision, okay? I have this phrase, if you're involved, you're responsible. I think this is one of the greatest things about being a founder is you can't sort of say, well, you know what, that person was responsible or that person made that decision. The great thing about a founder, both the upside and the downside, is if you're involved, you're responsible, okay? I want you to think about commitment as a superpower. Okay, I want you to think about it as a real superpower. Okay, that committing to a life of uncertainty. Okay, that doesn't mean jumping off a cliff blindly into an ocean with sharks underneath. What it means is when you see uncertainty, trust your judgment to actually encounter it and embrace it and walk into it. Okay, get some additional information and then double down. Okay, and that's where leadership happens. Okay, that's where leadership happens. It's in those uncertain moments where you must trust your judgment. Okay, and if you start trusting your judgment, what you'll find is that extraordinary things can happen if hopefully you're both lucky and good. Okay, you know, there's a quote I like by Teddy Roosevelt, which I'll read to you. It is not the critic who counts, not the man, let's just say not the person who points out how the strong person stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So really what this quote says to me, and I would ask each of you to answer this question for yourselves, despite some of the context you're in, which is at the end of your life, would you have rather tried and failed or not tried at all? And I think for those of you, obviously there's a third option, which is try and succeed, but I actually think forcing yourself to actually decide between those two lesser options, I think most of us would say I'd rather try and fail. And, you know, Eminem, you know, my son used to listen to Eminem when I drove him to school, and it would drive me crazy because I would say to him, why are you listening to this garbage? And so it's very ironic that now I listen to Eminem and it's actually not garbage. And so what Eminem says is in the song Lose Yourself, look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, one moment, would you capture it or would you just let it slip? Now, here's the thing. I think when you read this, all of you would read this and say, I would capture it. Like if I knew I only had one shot, if I knew that I only had one shot and it was the only shot I'd ever have to achieve the impact that I most wanted, I would capture it, right? You would capture it. And it would be really sad if that was the only shot you had and you didn't capture it. But I'm going to tell you what's even sadder than that, okay? What's even sadder than that is living a life with multiple shots, but never taking any one of those shots because you always thought the next shot was going to be much better, okay? And so what I would say to you is as you think about this, right, think about the small C commitments that you will need to make sooner rather than later to actually capture your shot, okay? Such that you can position yourself to have the impact that you desire, whatever it may be. Okay, so with that, I wish you all the best. I wish I could see you. I don't like the fact that I can't see anyone, Jenny. I'm not sure I'm a fan of this because for me, it's much less real if I can't see the students, to be honest. So I would like to see their faces next time. But I'm happy to answer. I've got 5 minutes. So if you'd like to ask any questions, I'm happy to do so.
Sure, we can invite maybe a handful of folks up on stage. If anyone wants to raise their hand, please only raise your hand if you have sufficient bandwidth to turn on your video. And also, we ask that you keep your questions short and concise.
By the way, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn if you guys want to, because I do post occasionally.
Awesome. All right. Chandra from India, I've invited you to join us if you're able to. Same thing for Joao from Portugal. if you're able to join us, we would love to hear your question.
And I think we need at least one Kenyan as well for questions.
Okay. Someone from Kenya, raise your hand too, please.
Okay, let's get started.
Awesome. Hi, Chandra. We would love to hear your question. You might still be on mute.
Oh,
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sir. So I have a question that I am a team leader of entrepreneurship cell at my college, and once we were in competition and we lost that. So, sir, after that, after that losing, I am very confused that how to maintain that confidence in people of my team. Like, how can I gain their confidence back?
So listen, here's what I'd say is I can't tell you the number of businesses I have been involved with that I've founded that where there's just been massive rejection. Okay, just massive rejection, meaning KGS, yes, I tell you that I sold it for $500 million. We went to 200 investors. They all turned us down. All 200. 200. Okay.
That's a great number.
So my point is, and in some ways, if it was easy, everyone would do it and there'd be no real extraordinary gain to be had. Okay. So I think this concept that, you don't face you will face rejection all the time as a founder. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't process the feedback, but what it does mean is that you're thinking about a problem much more deeply than any business school contest is. Okay. Meaning this is one person's view that has thought about it for 10 minutes versus presumably you've been thinking about this problem in a much deeper way. So I'll move on to the next question. What I'd say to you is that being a founder is full of rejection. You need to understand that. You need to process it. Sometimes the feedback is legitimate. Sometimes it may be all sorts of reasons why someone's giving you that, but it's in some ways it's also rational because
it's very hard to maintain that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, but I think you've got to stay committed. You just have to stay committed. I mean, it doesn't mean you're finally committed, but as long as you know things that others don't, you keep going.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next one. Yeah.
Joyao, we would love to hear your question next.
Hi, is it me?
Yes. So first of all,
Yes, thank you.
Who's better, Ronaldo or Messi?
Oh, I actually like Messi better.
Oh, wow. You may be the only Portuguese person that would say that.
Yeah, I don't really like Ronaldo, but that's another
let's go to your question.
discussion.
Let's go to your question.
So I just wrote about it. I don't want to sound vain in some way, but so due to health problems, I faced many challenges, finishing my bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And now that I'm finishing it, I don't know what could be the next step, especially if I should do like a gap year or just focus on studying, even if it's in a less reputable academic institution. And the reason I say this is because I always strive for perfection and I always strive to wait for the next shot to know if it is better or not. And I'm currently facing this difficulty. It's not, there are people who are facing worse difficulties, of course, but this is my big dilemma right now.
So look, obviously I don't know your specific story, but maybe I just say two general points that may be helpful. The first point is I'm very sorry that you have had these health issues, but I would ask you to perhaps apply the mindset that I've suggested, which is I am sure that there are other people who have bigger obstacles and there are people who have fewer obstacles. But I would expect that you probably learned a lot from this obstacle, even though you didn't choose this obstacle, right? You learned a lot about what you're capable of, how you could overcome it, your resiliency. And so I would encourage you to see the positive in your ability to overcome those obstacles, the way you did it with dignity and the progress you've made, okay? And understand that set of skills and attributes is within you and also turns out to be a very powerful set of skills and attributes for other things, okay? So I've seen too many people go through these obstacles and just view them as a very negative experience. Look, I'm not suggesting that it wasn't negative. What I'm suggesting though is you learned something very powerful as well, okay? So that's the first point. And so the second point is, you know, I can't give you specific career advice because I don't know you, but what I would say to you is whatever your next step is, think about my definition of learning. Okay. Think about whether you're in a position where you're actually making decisions. I think that's the most, for young people, the faster you can be put in a position where you're making decisions, the better across the board. And so optimize for decision making. Okay. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, really.
Sharon, are you able to ask your question? Maybe not. All right, well, I'll invite one more person. Oh.
Yes.
Jambo, Bariaco.
Sorry.
Okay, sure.
I'm grateful for the session. I'm really grateful. So personally, I felt like it was very motivational. Like I was planning to start something. I normally have some foundation where I talk to girls, and it was really draining me because sometimes you get to a point where you can't do something until you get the drive, and you have really given me that. Asante sana.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great. That's fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're probably running up on the end of your time. Is that correct, Professor?
You know what, I mean, if there are questions, I can stay for another 3 or 4 minutes, depending up to you.
Okay, I'll invite a few more folks who have their hands raised.
And you can, if there's someone who's got, yeah, let's bring them on. But also if you want to put it in chat, if I feel like it's particularly compelling, I might answer it.
Sure, sounds good.
But yeah, bring them on. Oh, I like this question. What stage do I think I stand on the hero's journey? So it's interesting. So I think there's parts of me that feel like I've returned with some knowledge, and that the reason why I get the opportunity to hopefully impact 1,000 of you on the call is because I've kind of returned back to the ordinary world with some sort of a gift. Otherwise, I think you guys would have hung up a long time ago. But at the same time, what I've learned is that this circle is a continuous journey that you always want to be on. And so it is not a one and done. It's a circle where you keep going back and forth between the ordinary and the extraordinary world. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, hello, hi everyone.
Hi, how are you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Professor, for your insightful presentation. And I just want to ask a little bit question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a undergraduate student now. I'm in my first year, and I would like to be an entrepreneur, and I don't know how to develop my mindset to be a founder. So, is there any suggestion for that? Because I'm really interested. Your
Yes.
presentation was very insightful.
Yeah, so I think if you want to be a founder, the first thing what I do is sort of not surprisingly, it mimics my presentation, which is why do you want to be a founder? And invariably, I think what you would say is you want to be a founder because you want to have the freedom to have a positive impact, right? You may also say you want money, resources, etc., but ultimately it will be because you want to have a positive impact. So I think that's the first point, is that there's a driving desire to be a founder. Then the question is, what are the tactical skills to actually be a founder? And I would say to you that the most important skill that you need to develop is judgment, okay? Because being a founder is fraught with uncertainty, right? The reason that the gains are so huge is because it's uncertain. And so that's why I would say to you that the way to actually start the journey is to start making small C commitments to test your judgment, whatever those look like to you, okay? Entering into some positions of uncertainty, not jumping off a cliff, but making some decisions where you're not sure of the outcome so that you can start testing and trusting your judgment. And what will happen is over time, you will trust your judgment in a way where you can make much more material commitments such that you can build something of significance and hopefully have the impact that you want to have.
All right, thank you.
Okay. You know, someone asked the question about calm under pressure. So I think this is a very important point as a founder, is you are constantly reacting and being either managing people who disappoint, or customers that don't deliver, or suppliers that don't deliver, or investors that don't commit, etc. And what I'd say as a founder, you need to, what I say is operate in the gap. And what I mean by that is there's a gap between response and stimulus, which is freedom. Okay, and it's in that gap between response and stimulus where you get the freedom to choose how you behave and how you respond. Okay, and so I would encourage, whether it's as a founder or as a father or mother, whenever you're in situations of stress, okay, is to just pause, let that stimulus go through you, you know, wait in the gap for a minute, and then choose to respond, as opposed to so many of us who get stimulated and immediately respond. And oftentimes that response can be very destructive. Okay, one last question, then I gotta roll. Should I pick it, or Penny, or is there someone?
Yeah, let's do the chat just because it can take some time.
Okay. All right, the chat is moving so quickly that I can't even move. Okay, so how to stay focused on the path by being surrounded with negative people. Yeah, okay, so here's what I'd say is, as a founder, I would define negative as two ways. One is, you're going to be, as a founder, you will be surrounded by people who don't believe in your vision. Okay, that's like most people. Okay, because if most people believed in your vision, the opportunity wouldn't be there. All right, so as a founder, it's almost a prerequisite that you will be surrounded by people who say no to investing, say no to coming to work for you, say no to being your customer. But that's so that's a given. What's not a given is being surrounded by people who don't think you can do it. Okay, that I would say is a much more problematic. Okay, meaning it's one thing for people to say, I don't want to come along the journey. It's another thing to be surrounded by people who say you can't do it. And I'd say that that's a much more devastating and detrimental impact. And, you know, you don't want to surround yourself with people who behave in that manner. Okay. And so again, last question, someone said, I'll end on this, is how can I motivate myself? I think you motivate yourself by the two things that I think matter most, which are learning and impact. And so how you motivate yourself as a founder is by understanding that this is the path where you learn the most because of the decisions you're making and the judgment that you're building. And it preserves the option, or preserves the path for you to have the thing that all of you so desperately want, which is having a positive impact on the people you care about. Okay. And so those are big goals. And that is what I think can help you stay on a course that is both difficult, but incredibly inspiring. Okay. So with that, I wish you all the best and good luck. You know, I would say to you in closing, find something and someone that you are truly committed to. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really awesome session, and we're so glad to have you join us and sharing with our almost 1,000 participants today. So thank you once again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. To the rest of our participants, thank you for your great questions and your engagement during today's session. It was really awesome to hear about some of your personal journeys and your interest in being entrepreneurs and founders. So that was really great. And I hope you took a lot from today's session. I want to share a few reminders before we officially close, just because we're all here on the phone together. So it could be great to have this chance to remind you of a few things. So you've already seen that we have shared the attendance form here in the chat for the Zoom chat today. So please do click on that link, follow that link. If it's not copying you for some reason, take a screenshot, write it down, and type it into your browser so that you can access it. You do need to submit the attendance form to get credit for attending today's session. So you're required to attend at least one masterclass during module 2. So since you are here today, you attended today, make sure that you submit that attendance form. It's open for 3 hours starting now. So you can't submit it tomorrow. You have to submit it today. And if for some reason you aren't able to submit it, you will need to go to another class. There's no opportunity to submit it late. So yes, that can be found in the chat. It also can be found in Discord under the Professor Satchu chat channel. So the same place where you're putting some of your discussion posts related to this masterclass, you can also find the attendance form link there as well. There are a few things to know. So if you are having trouble entering your name or your email into the form, that means that you're not logged into your Aspire account yet. So the first thing you need to do is log into your account with apply.aspireleaders.org. And then once you access the link and you're automatically logged in, it will automatically put your first name and your last name and your email address. So you don't have to enter those on the form. And that's how we make sure that you get credit for attending today. So do make sure that you log in before you are accessing the form. Again, you have 3 hours from now to submit the form. If for some reason you have a technical difficulty or you aren't able to submit it in time, you will attend another session. There are a bunch more still coming up, and you just need to submit the form for that different session. One final thing is that, I forgot. Yes, so the link can be found in Discord. If you're having trouble, please connect with other participants about advice on how to get the link to work for you. We've been seeing others submit the link. So if you are having trouble, it's something on your end with the steps that you are taking. So please work together with one another to make sure you can figure that out as a group. We'll have more sessions tomorrow if you're able to attend. But if you already attended today's session and you submit the attendance form successfully, then that is all you need to do for module 2, since you only are required to attend 1 session. The last thing I'll share is that once you successfully submit the attendance form, you're going to receive an email from Aspire that confirms that the form was submitted. So that's how you can know if you successfully completed the attendance form. You're going to get an email automatically from Aspire once that's in. If you did not get that email, that means your form wasn't submitted successfully. So do just keep an eye out to confirm and make sure you got everything in. Thank you all for your great engagement today again, and a reminder that the form is only open for 3 hours from now, and you can find the link in Discord under the Professor Satchu Discord chat channel. Thank you for your great engagement. Thank you to our moderators for your help during today's session. And we will hopefully be seeing you soon at future sessions if you wish to attend. Bye, everyone. Thank you.